St. John's.
Hey, I'm Kyle, and you're watching the Newfoundland Hobbyist.
The Newfoundland Hobbyist is sponsored by Mid-Island Motorsports, located in Springdale, Newfoundland. www.edgeproinc.com. By the Sea Inn and Cafe, located in Kings Point. And Outdoor Pros, located in Mount Pearl, Newfoundland.
Welcome back to my workshop and to another episode of the show. If you didn't watch last week's episode, we're continuing with our knife project here, our 2-blade set. Now, if you want to check that out, head over to youtube.com, search my name, Kyle Noseworthy, and you will be able to find all the episodes for the show, including the first episode of this, if you don't already have it recorded on Eastlink. But let's get started. If you remember from last week, we ended off by heat treating these blades, and then I was hand sanding. And I've hand sanded both of these blades up to a mirror polish. I'm not going to show you just yet. You'll have to wait and see. Now what we have to do is, if you recall, we made those brass bolsters. We have to install those now. We have to surface them, install them, pin the pins through the tang, and then work on some handles. This is exciting work. It's kind of all gravy from this point on. I have the polish here taped up just so I don't mar the surface while I'm working on the handles. But if you remember, we have these notches here, these slots. And then we cut notches in our 1/4-inch brass as well, and those act as lap joints for those to go together. And it's a nice snug fit. Now, most people don't realize that you can polish almost any piece of metal. Like this rough brass here, you can bring to a beautiful shine with sandpaper and a little bit of work. So ideally, a polish is just a surface where scratches are so small you can't really see the texture anymore. How to get there, you could start with a really fine sandpaper, but it would take you forever to get to that finish with a real fine paper. What you want to do is start with a coarse paper and work up in succession until you have that finish. So we'll just start here now with some 220, and let's see if we find there's any real big nicks. And we'll know after just a few passes. Brass is so soft. If we find there's any real big gouges or anything, we might have to go to a rougher paper, but it doesn't look like we'll need to do that. So you can see now those beautiful 220 grit striations. So those scratches are from 220 grit particles. Notice it's nice and coarse. It's a nice even finish there now. It's uniform. It looks pretty, but you can feel that texture with your skin, and it's just not the finish we want. Now we'll move up to a 400 grit. And here is now our 400 grit finish. It's almost a satin. It's definitely noticeable from the 220. We're going to go much finer yet. This is a 2000 grit paper finish, and although it's very beautiful and it's reflecting light, it's still not good enough for our project here. Now right here we have a felt wheel on the bench grinder, and with a little bit of polishing compound, this is just, you can pick one of these up at Canadian Tire, both the compound and the felt wheel, and it's a really useful tool for this kind of work. And this is the kind of finish you can expect after a buffing. So we worked up to 2000 grit paper, and then just a quick buffing. All of this in total took maybe 10 minutes. 10 minutes from the rough finish to this, what you see here. So brass is such a nice material to work with. It's a great material to add to any of your projects. Blade number 1, it's getting its brass first. Let's get that in place. Look at that shine we have there now. I'm gonna have some extra, there we go. With a proper lap joint like that, you can see we have a very beautiful seam all the way around this knife. The only other thing you'll want to do to the bolster here is just chamfer the inside edge of this where the pin goes through here. That way, when our pin goes in, you can see we have a slightly peen head on there already. It'll go in and fall into. You need some material to wedge out. You need somewhere for the material to go so you can have a flush ground surface, because we want everything to be flush. You won't even see the pin when this is done. You need something to stop that pin from backing out either way. So the pin can't come through on that side, and now we can pin this side out. With those brass bolsters all in place, they're there for good, hopefully. Now we have to mount up some scale material, and scales can really get fun because you really get to be creative. There's so many materials, you can use almost whatever you want. The choice for these blades is a material called Spectra Ply, and basically what it is a premium grade plywood, or it's layers of wood. It's like a laminated wood, similar to a plywood, as you can see the layers here, but it's all stabilized, and there's no, I say premium grade plywood because there's no knots, blemishes, or anything in this. It's just as perfect as like a synthetic material, but it's real wood, and it's stabilized with resin, so it's going to be as durable as like a plastic or a micarta. But you have all of those cool colors in there. What we have to do, it comes in these big blocks here. I'm just going to rip it down to a nice width, the perfect scale thickness for this for the tangs. And just like that, we're about to glue up. All we need to do is clean and degrease everything here now, which is not the fun part of the process for me. The most trouble I've had in my knife making hobby or career, whatever you want to call it so far, is in glue up. That's where I've had most of my trouble so far, and that is scales delaminating, coming back off the knife, issues with temperature, issues with setup, issues with dry joints, and it's just, I seem to have nailed it now. I never have any trouble anymore, but for a while when I was getting started, that's what gave me all my grief, and it kind of put a sour taste in my mouth. Those tips and tricks I find are what makes all the difference from having a frustrating time working at your hobby or working at your projects and having a joyous time. If you're there struggling and you just can't get past stuff, sometimes it's just a little trick, a little change, a little something can make all the difference. Like struggling to get pins through. I struggled a long time because brass is so soft. It malforms really, it upsets really easily. And when you're trying to drive a 3/16 brass pin through a 3/16 hole, and you have, say, 1.5 inches of material to go through really thick, you really need a lot of force pounding on it. Now, as you're pounding on that pin, you're also upsetting the pin. So the further it goes in, the less it wants to travel. And I've had knife handles wrecked because of that. I just couldn't get the pins through, ended up breaking up my handle. Just terrible. A little trick I learned is now my 3/16 pin, I just take it over and just give it a couple little twists on a fine belt on the belt grinder, and it just takes off probably 1 or 2 thousandths of an inch. That's all I have to remove to just nicely tap those pins right through this 3/16 hole. A little trick like that, so simple, but it took me a little while to catch on to. But it makes this whole process so much easier. A couple more great tips. Buy boxes of these disposable nitrile gloves. These are so handy to have around. They aren't expensive, you get a lot for your money, and just if you have to glue up something, just to walk away with squeaky clean hands, not have to go in and be stripping glue off your hands, or if you have to dye something. This morning I went to service the quad there. I had to pull the drain plug and the filter out of the quad. I just took it off, of course, and when I was done, stripped these off, and my hands were squeaky clean, just like I never even came outside yet today. And that's worth a lot, especially if you're in a hurry. Let's say I'm working here in the shop and I have to jump in the vehicle and run to the store right quick. It's really nice to be able to strip those gloves off, have nice clean hands, and not have to worry about getting in the vehicle. Another thing to buy, these little plastic cups you get at the dollar store. I'm not sure what they're used for, but they are so handy. Really cheap and really handy, even if you're just like, let's say you're about to drain the float bowl on your carburetor on the bike or something. Having one of these little cups in just to drain that float bowl. What else would you use? Try to cut open an old pop bottle or something. You have this nice stack of cups there that are so handy. If you're gluing up a wood project, pour a little bit of glue out in one of these cups. And also, in addition to that, popsicle sticks. Also at the dollar store, also really cheap, but so handy. I use popsicle sticks all the time. Again, it's those little tips and tricks that just make your time in the shop so much easier and more efficient. Now my gloves are covered in glue. There'd be no point in touching it with my hands. How do you want to get those gloves off? Is pull one off with your glove, hold it inside, and then pull your other one out over. And now you've got the inside of your glove out, so it's nice and clean. This is not going to be getting glue on your workbench or on your floor or bottom of your boots or something like that. Nice and clean. And my hands, of course, very nice.
The Newfoundland Hobbyist is sponsored by paulsfinest.com, Noble's Timber Mart with locations in Springdale and Bayvert, wildmedkits.ca, Robinson's General Store located in Middle Arm, and ABS Busing, also located in Middle Arm, Newfoundland.
So a day has passed, probably right around 24 hours. Of the epoxy on these handles curing, and if we did our mix right and we did everything just fine, then these scales shouldn't delaminate today. That's the plan. Like I said, I don't have any of these issues anymore. I have it down pretty good now, but we're gonna get started. We're gonna see what the knives actually look like today. I can't wait to cut into the Spectra ply because I've never seen what it looks like. You don't get to appreciate it until you start cutting across the grain. What we're at so far. This might look half decent on camera, but I assure you it's a pretty rough finish. This wood is really flat, just like you'd see a piece of plywood in the store. There's brass is up to a 240 grit belt, which has a little bit of shine, but it's certainly not glimmering like we want it, like the front is there. You can see a pretty big difference. So now's where we start the hand sanding. That's as good as I can get it on the belt without putting more grooves and doing more damage than good. But you get a good idea of the color. This will all darken and enrichen once we get it up in grit and then give it a polish. Once again, we'll want our lovely set of files, and that's the first work I'm going to do, is start making the transition from the steel and the wood into that brass bolster. Now here's a really cool piece of information. In case you didn't know, you can actually buff just raw wood, even when it's not stabilized. Like if I'm doing a nice juniper handle, I'll use some wax or some polishing compound that's a real light color. There's one kind that I stumbled upon that I tend to really like for wood. It doesn't darken or spoil the color of the wood, and you can actually buff, if you do a good sanding, you can actually buff that wooden material up to a glassy finish. It'll look like you did like a shellac or a real heavy varnish on it, when really it's just the wood finish. I use a nice firm spiral stone wheel, which is a good surface here. This is an actual buffer, which runs a little different. The speed is a little different than a bench grinder. You have longer arbors there, which is nice because you can get at your project a little better. I'll just dress the wheel with a bit of compound. And that is what that wood looks like when it's finished. Isn't that beautiful? I'd say this build is coming along well. Next we have leather work, which is going to be a fairly big project for these two blades. These are some big blades for starters. Look at that polish. And now we're at the nice clean part, the final stage, and that is leather work. I took some cardstock paper and just drew up a simple template here. That way you can get an idea of what you need without cutting up your nice leather and risking spoiling it. So this is the shape I decided on. This is the size I wanted. I traced that off on leather. So here you go, beautiful 6 or 7 ounce veg tan leather. If you want to know the whole ins and outs to leather work, exactly what you need, how to do every step, you can head over to www.youtube.com, search my name, Kyle Noseworthy, and go back to some of last year's seasons. I actually did an episode in season 2 of this show where I showed exactly every stage how to leather work and the tools you would need. Now, these sheaths are designed to be scout carry. That's what the customer ordered, which means they will be cross-drawn. So they will wear horizontal like this on the belt, and you will pull out sideways. So we have our welts cut, just very simple. We have some straps cut for scout carry, and we are going to start dyeing, gluing, stitching. We're going to put it all together. Here we go with those quick access gloves again. Leather dye. Of course, leather is flesh, and it's dye designed for dyeing the hide, so flesh. So you can imagine when you get it on your skin, it's not the easiest to get off. We're going with a tan finish here. And first, I'm not going to dye the outside yet. We just need to dye the inside up near the top, because once the sheath is folded over and glued, stitched, we won't be able to get in there, and you'll have to see that untreated white inside there. We don't want that. So just dye this down past where you can see it. I don't want to soak leather into down here, so that's where, or dye down in here, sorry, because that's where your blade is going to sit, and I don't want that to be soaked with dye. those popsicle sticks coming in again. All set up, ready to go.
Now with that bit of glue holding this together, it's just clamped for a few minutes there. Now is when you want to finish those edges. It's easy to do. We can get that on the belt sander, grind that down to a nice smooth finish so the welt sits smooth. This will rest on the shape after, but yeah, we'll contour it all out nicely. Then we can mark our stitch groove.
Stitch groover. Oh, that's a good stitch line.
Mark out my stitching with an overstitch wheel. Make sure if you have like a crucial point like this corner, this sharp corner, make sure you start your stitch wheel at that point. Because if not, and your stitch doesn't line up there, your stitch will have to round the corner, and that'll spoil that nice sharp look. Now both of those knife handles have a real light natural color plywood in them, so I'm going to bring that out with some light kind of a wheat color stitching here. Could go with black or dark brown, but I'm going to choose this color today. And we are going to run a saddle stitch. All of my work is done completely by hand. So every stitch and every sheath is sewn just like this. And we're at the finish line. I'm just massaging some mink oil into this leather, and the mink oil will help protect the leather because leather is naturally fairly absorbent to moisture, so some oil on it like this will help that give a little bit more resistance to the elements, and also it'll take it from that real matte finish to like it'll put a nice shine on it. You know, leatherworking is such a great hobby to get into, and I recommend it to so many people. For one, it's so relaxing. For two, it's not too expensive to get into, and it's not that difficult of a hobby to learn or a skill set to learn. And three, it's great for people that maybe don't have a lot of physical ability. I was talking to someone just a little while ago online through email. They contacted me. They were talking about how they had undergone some fairly serious physical trauma, physical stress, and they were in a wheelchair at that point and just kind of fed up with being sat on the couch watching TV. And I recommended leatherworking to them because of course I was going around to a few tools like the drill press and the belt grinder and stuff, but that is just for my ease of use. It's really quick to get the job done. You do not need those tools, and in fact I think most hobbyist leatherworkers don't use those tools when they're leatherworking. So if you're someone that has a reduced ability like that, perhaps you can't get around or you don't have a workshop, this is a great hobby to take on and learn. On top of that, it's also a really useful and rewarding hobby because look at the stuff you can make.
these are not too difficult of a leather sheath to make. They're a fair size sheath, so it takes quite a bit of leather, but it's just a beautiful and useful piece of equipment now that can be used for a lifetime if taken care of properly, treated properly. Just two beautiful pieces like that you're able to do in the house at the kitchen table if you wanted. So there they are, completely finished, 2 customers' orders. Challenging and awesome project for me for sure, but I got to create 2 gorgeous heirloom blades, and I'm sure that's what they'll come to be if they're taken care of by their owners. So it was a great project. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of the Newfoundland Hobbyist. I know I sure enjoyed filming it. Thank you guys, the audience, for watching. If you can support the sponsors, please do. I want to give a huge thank you to them. They help make this show possible. As always, make sure you tune in next week to the Newfoundland Hobbyist.